Today is the 4th of October, 2016. Welcome to our Sound for Video session this week. Number of great questions. Let's jump right in. First one from Nick Laws. Hey, Curtis, I have a few for you. I've seen some behind-the-scenes footage where there are multiple boom mics being used to record dialogue. Is this something you've encountered? If so, when should this be done versus moving the mic between speakers? If the people and gear are available, is this preferable? Those are all good questions, Nick. Yes, I have seen that, and it depends on the circumstances. If you are doing more of a interview type shot, a lot of times you'll have two booms. If say you have two people in the interview, one boom for each person, separate mic for each person. That for interviews, that makes it a lot easier. It's really hard for a boom operator to be able to actually, hand boom something for, more than a couple of minutes per take, maybe 5 minutes. Anything beyond that, it takes a special person to really be able to boom for that long. So that's one thing. And you can statically boom those from a Century stand using little, there are a variety of different tools you can use to attach them to a boom stand. I have a little thing that's kind of like a hook, so you just sort of set it in there. It's not super secure, but it's quick to get it in and out. And that works for most of the cases where I use it. You also have some that are more secure in terms of actually clamping down on the boom pole and holding it in place. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is on film or video where you have talent that are relatively far away from each other. That's another case where you often have a second boom operator. The reason for that, of course, is they're so far away, it's not practical to boom, to cue between the two actors or actresses. So that's another circumstance. Incidentally, information to go along with that, the way it typically works on a large budget production, you'll have a sound crew that consists of 3 people. The mixer, who sits usually at a cart with the mixer, and they're not usually right on the set. They're usually just a little ways away from the set. You then have the boom operator, who of course is operating the boom, and then you have the cable man, which is kind of the production assistant of the sound group, I guess. Responsible for making sure all the batteries are fresh and all the wireless gear or any other gear that needs batteries. Probably rolling a lot of the cables when you're done, rolling the cables out. And then that person will often act as a second boom operator in the circumstances where it's required. So that's a case where, again, the actor and the actress, or whatever the cast may be, are too far apart from each other. So you do need a second boom. Those are the two main circumstances I've seen where you have two boom operators. You could do it in other circumstances too. I imagine there's some circumstances I haven't thought of, so it's just a practical thing. Those are my thoughts on that. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Next question: if I go on a narrative film set or even a corporate gig as a dedicated sound guy, what kind of notes do I need to take for the editor? Wow, that is. What I would probably start with in terms of notes is I would get a template for a standard sound report. There are lots of them online, and I'll try and find one and link to it just so you can see what it looks like. But it's just a matter of keeping track of the start time code, the scene and take, and there are a variety of notes that you can leave. Like for example, if it's not going to be a good take, you can say that the boom entered the frame, so you wouldn't want to use that one. You can write notes in terms of which one you think is best from a sound perspective. So, or if the director or the assistant director call out and say that's the take we want, you can write that on your sound report. So it just makes anything you can do to help the editorial staff, those that are going to actually do the editing of the video, and the sound post staff to make their job easier, to find the clips that they need and get them into the picture. So that's the main idea at a high level, and I'll try and find a link to link to a sound report so you know what that looks like. Incidentally, a lot of the higher end mixer recorders these days, a lot of that information you can actually enter into the mixer itself, so it's all saved in the digital files, and then when you're done with the production day, there's a feature on most of these mixers. I know my Sound Devices 633 has it, the Zoom F8 even has it. What you do is you go to a setting in the menu that generates a sound report and it actually creates a file. And that's saved on either the SD or the compact flash card or whatever kind of media you have. And then you can actually essentially create a sound report in electronic format. So that's a pretty cool way to do it too. Incidentally, you can also leave notes. It's a little harder if you don't have some sort of interface, either On the Zoom F8, for example, you have the iPad app, which allows you to do that. On the sound devices actually just released a little kind of wireless dongle thing called Wingman that allows you to do the similar thing. So they now have an iPad app. You can do the same thing there. Or on the sound devices, you can also connect a USB keyboard. And actually some of the other higher end mixers and recorders allow you to do that as well. They have a USB input. So you just hook up a USB keyboard and you can type in notes and things of that nature. So that's the general idea. And then his final question, one more question. Can we look forward to a review of the Tascam DR-10L and or a comparison with the JuiceLink Little Darling recorder? I'm interested in moving from my DR-05s to these for wedding films. So we did a little research on the Tascam DR-10L. This is a new product. It has not released yet. It should be out within the next few weeks, it looks like. Available for pre-order. Will begin shipping, according to B&H, on November 1st of this year. So its retail price is $199 or $200 US. And it looks like if you pre-order, you can buy it for $169.99. What it is, for those who are not familiar with it, I actually wasn't familiar with it. This is a new one they snuck in on me. It's something that you would use in lieu of a wireless lavalier system, and instead it's a distributed audio recorder. That is to say, rather than the body pack transmitting audio back to the camera or to an audio recorder, doesn't do any transmission at all. It records on that little body pack, and then you would sync that up to your picture later. So it's a very similar thing to the JuiceLink Little Darling, if you are familiar with that. This is Tascam's offering in the same space. It comes with a lavalier microphone. It says that it uses micro SD cards. It has a limiter, evidently. I don't know if that is an analog limiter or a digital limiter, but that's an interesting feature. It's powered by a single AAA battery, and it evidently gets about 10 hours of battery life with a single AA or AAA, which is pretty good. It looks like it's very small, and that's a nice feature as well. It has a dual recording mode. It does have a monitoring port. It has a locking connector for the microphone. So actually some pretty nice features. What do I think of it? I'm actually interested to test it myself, Nick. I don't have any inside connections with Tascam. What I can say, I'm hopeful that this will be a pretty interesting device and a useful device. The only thing that leaves me with a little bit of doubt is that on the Tascam devices I've used in the past, the 3.5 millimeter input preamplifiers on the Tascam DR-05, and you have experience with those, and also the DR-60D Mark II, which also has a 3.5 millimeter input, those weren't the best preamplifiers that I've ever used. And the main thing, they sounded okay, but they were noisy relative to a lot of the other competitors. So, for example, the Zoom H1 had a cleaner microphone input than the Tascam. So I hope that they can address that issue and that they make this a little bit cleaner. Otherwise, it looks like it'd be a really interesting device. And yeah, I think for wedding shoots, like you mentioned, this could be a really nice piece of kit. So I will endeavor to review it once it becomes available. So thank you for those questions, Nick. Greg Palmer had some questions over the last couple of weeks, and he did something really cool that I want to actually show you. Greg, I hope you're okay with showing your handiwork here. So he had a problem he wanted to solve. He has a Zoom F8, an Orca OR30 sound bag, and he was finding it difficult, and I totally understand, to operate the Zoom F8 in a little bag just like this. And again, the Zoom F8, well, it's a great recorder, I think, for the price. It's difficult to mix with it because everything's so small and compact, close together. So that makes the iPad app pretty useful from that standpoint, at least in terms of getting the recorder set up before you start rolling. And so he wanted a convenient way to mount that, so he made his own, which is very cool. It looks like 2 pieces of aluminum or steel here, brackets with some nice wood inserts there, and a kind of a platform. So you put one end of it down into the bag, and it clamps with these elastic clamps here. And then the iPad, this is an iPad mini, just to kind of give you a size reference here, with some elastics holding that in place. So that's a very cool little contraption there. Great idea. Great DIY job there, Greg. So I just wanted to show you guys that. That's a really clever idea. And if maybe if you guys leave enough feedback, Greg can start producing those. All right. I'm not committing to that, and he's not committing to that. I just thought it was a really clever idea, and I think there's a market for it. Next question's from Mark Latani. Curtis, saw you in Barcelona today. Thanks for the idea about foam core and LED light. Still having trouble with proper color correction. So this one is not going to be directly sound related. This is going to be a couple of other questions here. Still having trouble with proper color correction, never mind color grading in Final Cut Pro 10. DaVinci Resolve seems to be better at that, and your brief video on adjusting color balance sparked a renewed investigation. For a future session, could you spend a moment on the relative merits of using DaVinci for color grading as a part of an FCPX or Final Cut Pro 10 workflow versus using it as a standalone nonlinear editor? So actually using Resolve as not only your color correction and grading application, but also doing your video editing, your cutting in Resolve. Not sure I'm up for another steep learning curve just yet, but maybe. I'm only doing talking heads and interviews and don't see myself getting into filmmaking, but what I do, I'd like to do really well. Okay, this is actually something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, and I've considered moving to DaVinci Resolve as my nonlinear editor in addition to just a color correction type thing. I would say this, if you are, my sense is my kind of somewhat cursory look at DaVinci Resolve as a nonlinear editor, I found it more difficult to cut as quickly as I can in Final Cut, or even in Premiere, for that matter. Certainly than Final Cut. Final Cut has some features that really kind of speed up some things in my particular workflow, so I really enjoy using it. I also use Premiere from time to time. But I felt like there were still a lot of kind of rough edges in Resolve. People will disagree with me on this, and that's okay. We can all have our own perspective on this. And it really it's kind of a personal thing, how you like to work, what works best for you. So don't anyone get too bent out of shape here. This is just my opinion, disclaimer. My sense is that, Mark, if you are feeling comfortable in Final Cut Pro 10 and you just need to be able to do some color correction, I find that the plugin called Color Finale that plugs into Final Cut Pro 10 is a lot easier for me to use to do basic color correction and maybe some mild grading than the inbuilt color board in Final Cut Pro 10. Some people like the color board. I don't care for it. My sense is that it's too sensitive and it doesn't work well. It's an interface. It doesn't work well for me. But Final Cut Pro 10 and Color Finale work quite nicely. So if you're really comfortable with Final Cut Pro 10, you don't really want to learn a new nonlinear editor, and you don't want to go through the risk of taking a step backwards in some respects, because it is, I think, well, I'll come back to that idea. So I would stay with Final Cut Pro 10. That would be my opinion, and that's one way to do it. On a lot of the shoots I do, however, I still use DaVinci Resolve, and let me explain to you how I do that. I actually do the pics of the clips I'm going to use before I start cutting, and that's feasible in most of the cases where I'm doing it for the corporate pieces, because I know for the talking head pieces, at least, the talking head clips, I'll take those into Resolve. I'll have picked which clips I want ahead of time, and in many cases, I'll just do all the clips because it's not that much footage. I mean, it's maybe 20 minutes worth of footage that will end up in that's probably max 20 minutes worth of footage, which will end up in maybe a 3-minute piece, corporate piece. So for me, it's not a huge issue to go ahead and take all of it into DaVinci Resolve and go ahead and grade all of it, export it out to a ProRes, and then bring it all into Final Cut Pro 10 and do the cutting and editing. So that's the way I typically will do my shorter corporate pieces. That doesn't work if you're doing a film that's longer and you have tons of footage. You don't want to, in theory at least, you don't want to bring all that footage in, grade all of it, spend the hours that it's going to take to export it, and then go edit it, because that's just a lot of wasted time. So that's my initial thought. Secondly, just to talk a little bit more about DaVinci Resolve, I have nothing but praise for Blackmagic Design and what they've done with DaVinci Resolve. I think there will come a point when that editor will be fairly mature, and I think some people are at the point now where they're saying it's mature enough for what they do, and that's fine. I just find it, I I think there's some things that need to be done to help it, to make it a little bit more efficient to work with. Like, for example, if for those of you who have used Final Cut Pro 10, you understand kind of the magic of the magnetic timeline. That saves a lot of time. And you can do that similar type stuff I know in Premiere, you use different tools, and it's not quite as automated as it is in Final Cut Pro 10, but I felt like some of that was still missing from DaVinci Resolve. So you still had to kind of drag a lot of clips around and do a lot of dragging, was my sense. I also felt like a lot of the transitions weren't very mature yet. Again, they're getting there, and I don't think it'll be much longer before they really flesh that out. But for me right now, that's my personal opinion. I'm sticking with Final Cut Pro 10. If I want to have a very simplified workflow, I just do the color correction with Color Finale. If I want to do kind of a more thorough job on the color correction and grading, I will take the footage into DaVinci Resolve first. So hope that's helpful for you, Mark. That's a good question. Thanks for that. Okay, and final question for today from Kara. I usually use Tascam DR-10L Mark II with a Rode mic. I need to record a panel discussion in a public space with mic'd panelists. How do I use my field recorder to plug into their soundboard directly? Is this the best way? Which cables should I buy to do this? Would this be your best suggestion? Could I use multiple lav mics all hooked to one wireless port? Signed, Confused. Well, that's actually a very good practical question. I would say this. I do typically, if you have a professional sound mixer there on site at a soundboard doing the mixing for the event, that can be a really good way to capture the audio because a lot of the work will be done for you if they're a skilled mixer. If they're not a skilled mixer, you might be better off, well, yeah, I guess you'd have to put another set of microphones up if you really wanted to avoid a lot of the issues that unskilled mixer might be bringing in. Let's just assume that the mixer is skilled and they're doing a good job of mixing the overall audio for the PA system, for the live sound. Then I think a great way to do it is to actually get a feed from their board and feed that into your recorder. Your Tascam DR-10L Mark II can do that. It can take a line level input. So what's happening on this case is that the mixer is bringing all the mics from the panelists into their mixing board, and they're creating either a mono or stereo mix. And that's what gets sent to the loudspeakers in the room. So what you could do is get a line level feed from the mixer's board and connect that to your Tascam DR-10L Mark II. That can come in a variety of different ways. It depends on the mixing board, and there's so many mixing boards out there. The three types of connectors you're most likely to encounter that you can get a feed from a board would be XLR, quarter inch, or RCA. So what I would say this is, if you haven't talked to the mixer before the event, you have to be kind of sensitive. Those guys have a lot going on during the live event. So just coming up to them 2 minutes before the event starts doesn't usually cut it. It's pretty inconsiderate, actually. So I would say, Cara, if you're going to do that, best to make arrangements with the mixer ahead of time if you can. By ahead of time, days ahead of time if you can. But if you can't, and you can only get there early while they're setting up, you have to gain their confidence. So there's some kind of soft skills involved here. And I've had to do that a few times. And what I try to do is I try to kind of try to convey that I know what I'm talking about, that I understand audio, not to be gloating or egotistical about it, but just to kind of let them know, hey, I'm trying to get a recording of this, and let them know what it's for, because they could also get a little bit weird about that stuff too. And then explain, hey, what I've got this recorder, I've got all these cables. If there's any way I could get just even a mono feed from the board, I've got quarter inch, I've got XLR, and I've got RCA. Whatever you can feed would be awesome. If you kind of approach it like that, I've never had them turn me away. The only one that I've had them turn me away is that they said they didn't have an output on the board. And actually, to believe it or not, there are some boards that don't have an extra aux output that you can hook up to because they've used them all for, however they're doing their mixing. So the problem is that on your end, you know exactly what kind of inputs you can take. You can take XLR or you can take quarter inch. So that's good. What you don't know is what the mixer is going to have unless you coordinate with them ahead of time. Oftentimes, they will have either quarter inch outputs, and that's the most common, I think. that's probably what I've run into the most often. And then there are also sometimes XLR and even sometimes RCA. Which ideally you'll get 1/4 inch because it'll be a balanced line output, and then you can take that right into your Tascam DR-1000 Mark II into the 2 microphone inputs if they give you 2. For dialogue like that, you probably only need 1. You just need a mono channel, but if they've got stereo, that's great too. Plug them both in, set both of the inputs to line level inputs, and then just adjust your meters once they start talking to make sure you're not clipping, getting the peaks around -12 or so. So that's what I would do. The problem is that if they've only got, let's see, so you'll want to get a couple of 1/4 inch to 1/4 inch cables, and you'll want TRS cables. If again, if you don't know what that is, those are with the 2 black or white rings on the actual tips. Those will be balanced cables. Or you can get XLR to XLR in case they have XLR outputs. RCA, you'll have to get an adapter cable because obviously you don't have an RCA input on your recorder. So you'll want to get an RCA to 1/4 inch is most likely what you'll want to get. So those are some things to consider. So that's generally the best way to do it, in my opinion, for those kind of events. Now, what you give up in those circumstances, if you're just getting the mics from the panelists, what you won't capture very well is the audience. So if it's kind of a situation where there's audience interaction, if there's clapping, applause, if there are questions from the audience, you won't pick those up very well unless they have some way to do that there. If it's just a panelist talking, they're probably not going to mic the crowd. So just so you're aware, that's just another thing you may want to consider recording as well. Just so when you do the final mix, if you do want to bring in applause at the end, for example, you'll want to have a separate recording of that so it sounds more natural. Because otherwise, if you just get the feed from the board, at the end where there's applause, you'll see the applause visually for if someone's recording it visually, but you won't hear the applause very well because the mics up by the panelists probably won't pick them up very well. So that's just a thought I've had. Have recorded some concerts in the past, and I remembered after one of my first ones, I was like, ooh, it's really weird. I didn't catch much audience interaction. So when they're clapping at the end, it sounds really flat and kind of like an awkward moment while the artists are standing on stage, getting all excited because people are clapping, but you're not hearing the clapping. So it's just kind of a weird phenomenon. So I hope that's helpful for you, Kara. Best wishes on your upcoming shoot there. So that's our session for this week. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below and get out there and make some great recordings. Talk to you soon.